a college dropout, a self-taught engineer, and a tiny suburban garage. That's all it took to build a company worth trillions of dollars. But Apple didn't become a global icon without spectacular failures, betrayal, and one of the greatest comebacks in business history. Today, Apple is worth trillions of dollars. Its products are used by billions of people. But the company didn't begin in a high-tech campus or a billion-dollar laboratory. It began in a small suburban garage with two young men, very little money, and an idea that sounded almost impossible. One was a brilliant engineer. The other was a relentless dreamer. Together, they believed personal computers shouldn't belong only to scientists or giant corporations. They should belong to everyone. That simple belief would change the technology industry forever. But Apple's journey was never a straight path. It was filled with spectacular success, painful failures, and one decision that almost destroyed the company. This is the incredible story of how Apple became one of the most valuable companies in history. In 1976, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne officially founded Apple. Wayne owned 10% of the company, but after just 12 days, he walked away. He sold his entire stake for only $800. Today, that same stake would be worth hundreds of billions. Meanwhile, Steve Wozniak had built an extraordinary machine. The Apple I wasn't just another computer. It proved that personal computers could become a real business. Soon, their first major order would arrive, and everything was about to change. The first order came from a small computer store called the Byte Shop. The owner wanted 50 fully assembled Apple I computers. There was just one problem. Apple didn't have the money to build them. So Steve Jobs convinced suppliers to provide parts on credit. It was a risky gamble. If the computers didn't sell, Apple would collapse. Day and night, friends and family worked inside the tiny garage. One by one, the computers were completed and delivered. The gamble worked. Apple had proven it wasn't just two dreamers with an idea. The Apple I proved the idea, but the Apple II changed everything. Unlike most computers, it was designed for ordinary people. It arrived with a keyboard, color graphics, and a plastic case. For the first time, a personal computer felt like a real consumer product. Families bought one. Schools bought one. Businesses bought one. Sales exploded. Apple was no longer a tiny startup working from a garage. It had become one of the fastest growing technology companies in America. And soon, success would bring something far more dangerous than failure. The Macintosh was finally ready. In 1984, Steve Jobs stood on stage and introduced a computer unlike anything people had seen before. It was simple, it was friendly, and it proved that computers didn't have to be complicated. But behind the applause, Apple's leadership was divided. Arguments became more frequent. The board began questioning Steve Jobs' management style. The company he had built was slowly turning against him. Soon, one meeting would change his life forever. The Macintosh was finally ready. In 1984, Steve Jobs stood on stage and introduced a computer unlike anything people had seen before. It was simple, it was friendly, and it proved that computers didn't have to be complicated. But behind the applause, Apple's leadership was divided. Arguments became more frequent. The board began questioning Steve Jobs' management style. The company he had built was slowly turning against him. Soon, one meeting would change his life forever. Steve Jobs had founded Apple. He had built it into one of the fastest growing technology companies in the world. But in 1985, everything changed. After months of internal conflict, Apple's board backed CEO John Sculley. Steve Jobs lost control of the company he had created. At just 30 years old, he walked out of Apple. For many people, it looked like the end of his story. But sometimes, your greatest setback becomes your greatest opportunity. Steve Jobs was about to begin his second act. Apple was struggling. Its products were losing their magic. Sales were slowing. The company needed a miracle. In 1997, Apple made an unexpected move. It bought Next, the company Steve Jobs had built after leaving Apple. With that deal, Steve Jobs returned, not as a visitor, not as a consultant, but as Apple's leader. Once again, Hugh believed he could save the company. What happened next became one of the greatest corporate comebacks in history. Apple was profitable again, but Steve Jobs wasn't interested in saving the company. He wanted to reinvent it. In 2001, Apple introduced the iPod, a tiny device that could carry 1,000 songs in your pocket. Millions bought one. Then, Apple opened its own retail stores. Customers didn't just buy products, they experienced the Apple brand. But Steve Jobs was already thinking beyond music. He believed one device could replace your phone, your music player, and much more. That idea would soon change the world. In 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage holding a single device. It was an iPod, a phone and an internet communicator, all in one. The iPhone changed everything. It transformed not only Apple, but the entire technology industry. Years later, Apple became the world's most valuable company. The garage where two friends built their first computer had become one of the most successful businesses in history. Steve Jobs didn't just build products, he changed the way the world communicates, works, and creates. And it all began with an impossible dream inside a small California garage.